Did you know there's a Minotaur and a Centaur inside each of us? Which one prevails in you? Which one? Today we're going to talk about this interesting topic related to myths, and we'll see that each of these images, both the Minotaur and the Centaur, is connected to an internal dynamic within us. And we'll see how we can notice these elements, which ones are prevailing, what each one needs, and how, let's say, to transcend. The idea would be to move away from the Minotaur and try to get closer to the Centaur. When it comes to the concept of myth and mythology, there are two distinct general views. One sees myth as the most primitive language of humanity, when we didn't know the laws of nature, the processes of cause and effect, as if it were to fill our ignorance. And another view that we're going to focus on more here is that these myths have a deep content. There's wisdom synthesized in them. So in these myths, we're going to see great truths, great realities, both inside us and outside. So it would be a symbolic language. What is a symbol? A symbol is something that contains, meaning the story of the myth, the mythical images. They're forms that hold deeper ideas. So, as we manage to see behind the appearance, see behind the symbolic language, we start to understand very vivid, very real content for us. So this universal mythology of these ancient civilizations, it synthesizes important values. And in this, we see Plato himself. He already talked a lot about the idea of myth as a synthesis. He used a whole dialectical approach in his dialogues. So, that's how he used myth. There are several Platonic myths, like the myth of the cave. And in this myth, he would tell a story or present an image to us that had very deep meanings. In other words, a deep image is worth 1,000 words. And in this process, we see that throughout the 19th century, there was a whole revival of this more symbolic interpretation of myths. We see Helena Blavatsky, then Freud himself. With psychoanalysis, we have several myths that were used, like the Oedipus myths and other complexes. And then Jung, who was a disciple of Freud, took this idea even further, linking it more to the collective unconscious, meaning these mythical images as if they were an inner reality of ours. And then Joseph Campbell, he was even one of the inspirations for Star Wars with the hero's myth. Also Mircea Eliade more recently in the 20th century. So there's a whole range of historians and researchers who have brought back this deep meaning of myth. In fact, on our YouTube channel, you'll find several super interesting videos on the topic. Videos about Jung, Joseph Campbell, Mircea Eliade. It's worth checking out. So, to sum it up, these myths talk a lot about the principles of the universe, the processes of the universe, and also about human beings, and also a whole path to develop these human potentials and even human fulfillment. Then there's this quote from Joseph Campbell that says, "Myths are metaphors for the spiritual potentiality of the human being." So there are going to be some really important keys, and this mythical view, they give a more objective perception. Within these stories, these images, we see this dynamic of our internal factors, and they give us the chance to understand more clearly, to position ourselves better, and to develop more enriching factors within us. So, to understand this world, these symbolic keys of myths, first, we need to grasp the perception these people had of reality. A basic, important idea is the perception of reality as two different, yet complementary planes. There would be a celestial plane and a terrestrial one. The celestial represents the world of causes, the world of ideas, or the spiritual dimension, or as Plato says, the archetypes. And the terrestrial world, the manifested world, would be the expression of these laws, these principles, these subtle, celestial forces in the material world. In the end, the two would be one and the same, and the sky is connected to the causes and the manifested world to the effect. So everything we see in the manifested world, in this dynamic of life, is somehow a reflection of principles, laws, and forces that are behind what we see. So it ties into that idea that says the essential is invisible to the eyes. meaning everything behind appearances is crucial for us to understand ourselves and the dynamics of life. And humans are always seen as having the ability to be in these two worlds, or within ourselves. We have the ability, through our reason and our feelings, to grasp these laws, to understand what's behind appearances, to understand the causes of things. And at the same time, we have our entire physical nature, our body, our instincts, our perception, through the five senses of the manifested world. So, humans are always seen as this bridge, having the ability to move between these two worlds, or to connect heaven and earth. So, heaven, earth, and the human being would form what you might call these three worlds within an overall vision. Now, these three worlds would also be within us. They'd be in the whole universe, actually. So the Greek key to human nature is that humans would have this nous, this psyche, and this soma. So what would the nous be? Our deepest part, our essence or spirit. In some way, it would be what we are on a deeper level. And also our potential for achievement. Then you'd have the soma, which is the denser part, like our own body, our vitality, and our instincts too. And the psyche would also be this intermediary within us, meaning a capacity through the mind, reasoning, and understanding, more profound feelings and emotions to connect with these causes. So this human psyche, it can either be turned upwards, so to speak, understanding sometimes the nature, the meaning of life, or it can be more focused downwards. So this is a really important point for us to understand the dynamics of myths and their relationship with ourselves. So now let's understand a bit about this image, what the Minotaur and the Centaur would be. It's interesting that both have a human part and an animal part. The Minotaur has the head of a bull and a human body. The Centaur, on the other hand, has the base of a horse, and from the waist up, it's human. So both are going to be important to represent these realities or our worldview. What would the Minotaur be? The fact that it has the head of a bull and the body of a man already shows that it's like our more instinctive side. Our identity with the material world is taking over. Instincts are something necessary, like the foundation of life, the survival instinct, the instinct to reproduce, the instinct for safety as a whole. So, all of this is important for us. Now, this idea, this image of the Minotaur, shows how these instinctive factors are the ones deciding life for us. This, or we are really identified with that. So, it's like a conditioning. These instincts or fears or desires end up deciding everything in our lives and giving a whole tone to our existence and identity. So instincts, they're great, they're necessary, and they're good. The problem is our attachment to them, our identity being stuck to them. We can indeed also envision this as all our complacency, our inertia of wanting to keep things as they are. In fact, wanting to stay rigid sometimes in our habits. So there's a lot of connection with our past too. An image I like to convey is the idea that imagine you're going to get a car as a gift, a really fancy modern car. Imagine it also has a sophisticated artificial intelligence. Now, there's just one problem. This car, this vehicle has a mind of its own. What does that mean? I'll get in the car when it wants me to. After I get in, when will I get out? When it wants. Where am I going? Wherever it wants. In other words, I might never get out, you know. So that's the difference between a vehicle and a prison. As this vehicle dominates us, something that would be a really important means of getting around, of doing a bunch of things, ends up limiting us. And this is an internal game of ours, very important. Sometimes we're really conditioned to certain aspects, in this case, the issue of instinct that we're talking about. In the myth of the Minotaur itself, it says he was deep in a labyrinth, imprisoned there, so to speak, because he was very dangerous, very out of control. And there was also a detail, this Minotaur feeds on humans. So, since Crete was just at war, Crete won the war, one of the conditions was that every man had to send 7 young people, men and women, to this labyrinth, basically to feed the Minotaur. And that's an interesting image, showing that as our instincts take over, dominate our lives, they end up kind of devouring our dreams, our ideals, our more human, higher impulses. So that image becomes really clear in this context. And what about the centaur? The centaur is pretty much the opposite, the upper part, from the waist up. The head is human, and its base is a horse, in other words, an animal. So this is important. It shows how our human side is leading. It's making the decisions. In other words, the head, which in the Minotaur is a bull, is now that of a human being. In other words, I'm choosing to perceive reality through values, principles, or through reason, or deep feelings. In other words, our human side actually has more perception. Remember, we talked about how the human part can understand the causes, the origin of things, the essence, the principles. So, this part that has this wallet, that has a broader vision of reality, it's going to decide. It's going to take charge, so to speak. And it doesn't mean it's going to dominate the animal part in a negative way. No, sometimes it comes into harmony because it's like our instinctual animal part is actually our base, our important foundation for being in the world. But it can't be in charge. So the centaur shows this harmony. The two are together, united. One has the vision, the perception, and the instinct has this ability to sustain life. There are several myths that also place the centaur in a context where this animal is also prevailing with these instincts. But we're going to focus on the key that's more connected to the image, especially the image of Chiron, who was the wise centaur, the educator of heroes, the master of heroes. Within this idea, the image of the centaur itself shows him shooting an arrow towards the sky, towards the stars. So it shows this aspect. The animal self is in its place, so to speak, providing the foundation, our important support from instincts. And the human self has this ability to connect with the celestial, meaning to perceive the causes, the principles. And that very arrow he shoots at the stars is like this broader sense of life. In other words, I perceive archetypes, I perceive the meaning of life, and I direct myself towards it. I guide my life, both my more instinctive side and the human side, towards a higher purpose. And it's interesting because there's always this idea of the Minotaur and the Centaur. It also shows an internal play of forces. Sometimes one aspect might be prevailing over the other, but it mainly shows a potential, a flow of life. In other words, from a condition where we're very conditioned by our environment, by our instincts, it's about achieving a sense of internal freedom. Like our potentials, our vision, our human potential keeps expanding and I start connecting with more essential parts of myself. It's related to the flow of evolution or growth or fulfillment. So we need to understand that within us there are, essentially, these two conditions, so to speak, and the myth itself, inherently, says there has to be a confrontation. Theseus himself, the hero of the Minotaur story, is, in a way, like our human side that ultimately has to face it. He goes to the depths of the labyrinth, he has to go deep within ourselves, and there he has to kill the Minotaur to free the young so they won't be devoured anymore. So this killing, in many myths, there's this issue of war and death. It's always associated not so much with eliminating, let's say, but killing our attachment. So the problem isn't the instinct, like we talked about, but the attachment to that instinct. So what does he have to kill? Our attachment. So there's gonna have to be a fight. And this fight is interesting because it's on many levels. Deep down, it's an existential issue for us. But from, I don't know, when we wake up in the morning, isn't there something in us that wants to keep that condition, wants to stay in bed, wants to keep sleeping, feeling lazy? So it's like this inertia of our instinctive self that wants to keep that state, that wants to hold on to that situation. And at the same time, there's a bigger need. In other words, I have to get up because I have my responsibilities, I have commitments I made, because I think our work is worthwhile. So, just so we understand, even from getting out of bed, there are these two forces. Something that makes you want to stay and something that doesn't. You gotta get up. You gotta go. So, in many situations in our lives, there's this sense of comfort, this inertia, and this need, let's say, to grow, to expand, to have better, broader things. And also a more philosophical question, you could say, where everything is connected, like that famous Shakespeare quote, right? To be or not to be, that is the question. Which really sums up this human issue, that humans have this potential to expand, to grow, to understand broader and deeper things, to develop virtues, and yet there's this tendency to stay in the comfort zone, to be inert. So it's an important key, to be or not to be, because this path towards the centaur, let's say, would be our human journey. What would being be? Our deeper nature, to seek this human essence, so to speak, or something higher. And not being would be stagnation, being stuck in this more instinctive condition depending on it. It would be our process of going with the flow of life. It's like a seed of a plant, an avocado tree, for example. It has that shell condition, it's in a seed state, but deep down, it's really a tree. So this seed is a moment, it's a state of being. So if I want to live just as a seed, I would be, in a way, let's say, suppressing or utilizing all of this incredible and amazing potential that exists within us to blossom and bear fruit in our lives. So these are images in nature that help us observe these internal factors within us. Then there's this indeed fascinating quote from Rollo May, which says, in fact, the myth is the roadmap of the soul, an expression of the very processes through which the human spirit can transform. So it has a lot to do with this idea, this myth. Let's say these images of the Minotaur and the Centaur are showing this whole nature, this dynamic, and this certain confrontation. So it's important to understand that we're going to have to confront these two aspects. That's why in the myth, Theseus goes to the depths of the labyrinth, which is like the depths of ourselves, and he has to face the Minotaur. And remember, the Minotaur isn't destiny. The Minotaur is attachment, it's conditioning. So he's going to have to face it, because it's a game of life. You're either going up or going down. You can't go up and down at the same time. So this human stance of confrontation is necessary, which is why these myths always emphasize the idea of a battle. And the fact of killing the Minotaur isn't about getting rid of instincts. No, instincts are good and necessary, but it's about not being attached to them. So this has a lot to do with how we see reality or our own identity. How do I see myself? How do I see the meaning of life? Is life just about maintaining a survival mode, chasing pleasures, avoiding pain, or pursuing desires, or is there a bigger meaning to it? It's like that image of the seed. It's a really cool image from nature. Imagine an avocado seed. It's an avocado tree, but it's in the seed state or stage, which is a necessary stage. But it is an avocado tree, and the avocado tree, so to speak, is all inside the seed. Everything it has to achieve, all its potential is already there, but it has to express itself. What is latent has to become evident, and for that to happen, it's going to have to overcome that seed condition. And the seed has that shell, because the shell is important to protect, to keep that structure intact. But the moment I realize and I'm trying to grow and fulfill myself as a human being, I'm going to have to break through that limit, the shell. So that shell represents our limits, conditioning, old habits. So what am I breaking through for? For something bigger, something better, deeper, that has to do with myself, with my own potential. So that I can bloom, bear fruit, be myself, and, at the same time, be part of nature, like an avocado tree. In other words, it fulfills itself internally and, at the same time, It produces fruits that can feed the animals, humans, and nourish the earth. So everything is connected. So deep down, this myth, or rather, these images are talking about human potential, about a path to fulfillment. Like we saw before, myths show us this potential, meaning we only truly fulfill ourselves as we overcome these limitations and not something bigger, developing more human elements. So, just like we have these instinctive needs, like I get hungry, I need to eat to nourish myself, to survive. I also have sexual needs for reproduction to keep the species going. And then there's the whole survival instinct, fear, things that are necessary to keep us alive, to take action. Just like we have these desires, these needs, we also have, in our, let's say, human soul, our human self, hungers that are typically human too. These human needs would also have their pleasures, which would go beyond just pleasures. They'd be satisfactions. Where the human being, as they nurture this nature, has this feeling of fulfillment, of a job well done, of doing good, of doing something just, of leaving something better, of creating something that brings harmony. So, that's also part of human nature, to understand the deeper meaning, a deeper understanding of the laws of the universe. In fact, traditions often talk about three important and fundamental human needs or motivations, which are these mystical, ethical, and aesthetic drives that have been recognized throughout history as essential to human experience and understanding. Mysticism would be this need to connect with something greater, to understand the laws, this relationship of the part with the whole. So, who am I? But then, what am I a part of? What's beyond? The very idea of the mysteries of God, this broader concept, it's all part of our quest to understand the causes of nature, the laws, a broader form of connection, which is mysticism. It's related to religion itself, philosophy too, the search for wisdom, the quest for understanding. That's something very inherent to being human. Every culture, every tradition we see always has this tendency to lean towards mysteries, towards the transcendent. And the ethical motivations would be this need for us to do good, to be kind, generous, to help people grow, this very compassion for others, to seek something more just a fair action. And then there's the aesthetic aspect, which is also an interesting topic, which we can basically sum up as a search for harmony. The harmony of each part with the whole. It's interesting to see that people sometimes travel far just to see a beautiful landscape, a cool place, visit museums. So this curiosity of ours, like watching a sunset, we just stand there mesmerized. So it's also part of this human need, let's say, and purely human motivation. And we need to understand this. It doesn't mean that instinctive pleasures or animal pleasures are bad. As we identify with something deeper, let's say this instinctive self becomes part of it. The very image of the centaur shows that the human part and the animal part are in harmony. The centaur sees, thinks, and everything goes together. One helps the other. One collaborates with the other. So, when this human side of ours starts to blossom, or this human soul gets nurtured, it doesn't mean we're going to deny these pleasures, but rather participate in them. It's like one thing is eating with the need and pleasure we feel when we eat. Now, imagine the eating just any old way, anywhere, all messy. And now imagine the eating in a nice, pleasant place, a well-set table, a nicely arranged plate, good music in the background, good company, good conversations, maybe a beautiful view. So you see, sometimes we pay a lot to have that, or even at home, it makes all the difference. So it's like eating. We need to eat. We're like animals. We need to eat, but we have our own way of doing it. If there's food on the ground, if it falls on the ground, an animal has no problem. It'll just go and eat it, and its body will process it right. Now, if a human sees people eating off the ground like that, we're gonna, wow, what's going on? We get kinda horrified. It's not natural, right? Because humans add to their needs, to their instincts, this human touch of beauty, of aesthetics, right? The very issue of sexual instinct, right? One thing is the sexual act itself, which leads to reproduction, right? Now, you see, for humans, one thing is a sexual act without feelings, and another is when we have love, respect the person, care for them. You see, these are dimensions that add up. So, this human self, let's say, gives us this internal completeness and gives meaning to everything, including our everyday pleasures. It adds this element. So, an important question is for us to look inside ourselves. What have I been feeding more? What have I been identifying with more? Then this image comes up, either more like the Minotaur or the Centaur. What's going to grow inside us? What we feed. So it's important, let's say, to nurture this human being. Animals have the instinct to feed, normally. In other words, fill our lives with a deeper meaning. Philosophy itself deals a lot with this in the search for wisdom, the meaning of life, understanding the laws. So, you gotta feed that. It's interesting that in ancient times there were the Osios, or divine Osios, and nowadays they're even calling it creative Osio. One school of philosophy was the school of bones. Because we have our job, let's say, which is our time dealing with this material need, work, service, maintaining things, and then there's this important time of Osios, which isn't about doing nothing, it's about cultivating our human soul. Which would be this question of philosophy, of seeking the meaning of life. What traditions say about this human nature, about the mysteries, and also the matter of art, of cultivating art, aesthetics, beauty, and also the study of science, of laws, and. So all of this would be like food for our soul. I mean, our human soul that's searching for these deeper things. So it's this balance. I have to observe, am I excessively feeding certain instincts? Because one thing is to nourish yourself, like we talked about. Another is to live just for food. Another is the matter of sex and the pleasure it involves. And another is to live just for that, right? So, for that, I have to be feeding one aspect and taking energy away from the other. And it's not just the instinct itself, but also, like we said, our limits or habits. Sometimes, for example, we get home and end up watching TV for 3 hours straight, flipping through channels and all that. And sometimes, there are trivial things that don't have a purpose in themselves, but they're just a habit. So, see if we could replace sometimes half an hour of that with a better habit, like reading a good inspiring book, or cultivating friendships, visiting interesting people, or reflecting, keeping a journal, which is an interesting practice, reflecting on what I learned during the day, or studying philosophy, or other human issues. You see, sometimes small adjustments we make. It's like I'm starting to feed a more important factor. Remember, this is a serious human problem. Since we identify a lot with material things, with our physical side and instincts, we want to fulfill ourselves just in that area. So we need a lot of stimuli to change tastes, change desires, change motivations to have more things, to have that, to be recognized. But that, let's say, is only satisfying a basic hunger. And for a human being to have inner fulfillment, they need to be in this flow, meaning nourishing that human soul. I have to be cultivating this knowledge, this wisdom, more love, more generosity, these human virtues. This will bring a sense of completeness because it ties into our nature. It's like the idea of a seed. So, if just the seed is good, there's a phase where the seed comes. But to achieve, I have to transcend. I have to cultivate something more. I have to break limits in the name of something bigger. So, this is really important and it's connected to our internal process. So, going back, what's the idea? There's this idea here of always moving a bit more towards what expands us, what nourishes our human soul. And a little less of what limits me, what conditions me, or that creates unhealthy habits for me. So, a bit more time, energy, and commitment to uplifting things that help me grow and take energy away from those limitations. So, this is a game that each person has to watch. These can be daily steps, small goals in our day-to-day, really practical ones, or a divine goal as a whole. So you realize that this myth, these mythical images are something alive, not just some old story, some strange tale. So this Minotaur is a factor within us. We can notice in our daily lives, like there are times when I'm limited, conditioned, or kind of trapped by certain habits, certain instincts, conditioned. And the centaur is also a reality, meaning when I'm looking for something better, I'm trying to grow, expand, understand more about nature, about humans. So this is a reality that we should notice and cultivate. So cultivate this human side of ours, remove our limitations, overcome limits in the name of something bigger and better. That's why I asked that question at the beginning. What prevails in you? The Minotaur or the Centaur? So each person will have to look within themselves, and this key already helps us a lot to reposition ourselves in life, because the whole aim of philosophy, of these traditions, is to help each person grow and be more complete. I don't want to change from one state to another just to be a good person, to go to heaven, to avoid hell. No, I want it because it's me. It's my potential. It's about a fullness and inner fulfillment for each person. And everyone has their own process. So this myth is an invitation for you to notice this, to position yourself, and, like a hero, to overcome the limit, face it, be better, and contribute. Because every time I overcome my limits for something greater, I also become an inspiration for others, a beacon of hope for other people. And we really need that a lot.